Good morning, good day, and good evening to all our attendees joining us for today's latest Data Science Central webinar. I'd like to start our event off today by thanking EVault for sponsoring today's event. It's wonderful to have them supporting the Data Science Central community, and we are honored to have them sponsoring our event today. I would also like to take this opportunity to mention and show appreciation for some of our other recent sponsors, including Pivotal, Teradata, Tableau, TIBCO Spotfire, Splunk, and Hortonworks, to name just a few. These past webinars are available on demand at datasciencecentral.com, and if you've not had the opportunity to view them, I would encourage you to take a look, as they do provide some very useful information. Today's webinar is entitled Implementing a Strategic Archive Solution, the Cure for Data Growth Insanity. Before we begin, I'd like to briefly review the format of today's webinar. Today's event will be approximately 1 hour long. We have two panelists that I'll introduce to all of you in just a moment. We should have about 15 minutes for Q&A following the presentation. And as always, this event is being taped and will be made available on demand later on this afternoon at datasciencecentral.com. I would also like to encourage our attendees to provide questions throughout today's event. We will be reviewing them and asking them at the end of the session, just in the Q&A section of the webinar today. And you should have a box on your screen that is marked Q&A, and this is a relatively new program for us that I want to make sure that everyone realizes that in the viewing area you should have a slide window that can be expanded to fit your screen if you want to make it a little bit larger. My name is Tim Madison. I'm one of the co-founders of Data Science Central, and I will be your host for today's event. I'm very pleased to introduce our panelists today, Arlene Eckhart and David Langdon of EVault. Arlene is a Solutions Marketing Manager focused on Cloud as a Service solutions at EVault. She has more than 15 years in the IT industry, helping such companies as Oracle, Siemens, Stratus, Veritas, and Symantec, bringing business-critical solutions to market. David is a senior product management professional with more than 25 years experience leading high-performance teams with a track record of growing product portfolios related to technology, mobile, internet, and cloud computing. His focus has been on the development of core technologies integral to shaping the next generation of cloud computing. Welcome to you both. Thank you for being with us today. According to research in 2012, our digital universe created 2.5 quintillion bytes of data every day. And for those of you that don't know, a quintillion is 1 followed by 18 zeros. It's a huge number. Even now, many businesses are drowning in the sheer volume of data. But do you really need to keep all of your data immediately accessible? In today's webinar, we will be helping you sort through the confusion to better understand the difference between backup, long-term retention, and archive. Determine what makes the most sense for your data environment, and implement a strategic archive solution within your budget. So with that, Arlene, I'm going to turn it over to you, and you can begin as soon as you're ready.
Thanks, Tim. Good morning, everyone. Before we get started, I wanted to first introduce, sorry, I'm getting used to pushing these slides. What I first wanted to do before we get started is do a brief introduction on who EVault is. EVault has been enabling cloud-connected backup and recovery, disaster recovery, storage and archiving for over 15 years now. And we're quite proud of the fact that we have one of the longest track records in the cloud storage market. And though we know that we're not as well known as some of the larger cloud providers who have come onto the marketplace in the last couple of years, our cloud-connected data centers support well over 43,000 customers worldwide, ranging from small businesses all the way up to Fortune 500 and Global 2000 type companies. And what we allow them to do is we allow these companies to focus on their bottom line, driving their business, and we focus on ensuring that their data is there when and where they need it. We're also part of the Seagate family of solutions, and Seagate is the world leader in disk storage environments. So let's get started. So there's certainly right now a lot of talk about the power of big data. A lot of focus on it, a lot of dollars are being invested in it, primarily because companies are looking for ways to unlock the potential that their business data and their customer data offers to them for many reasons. It allows them to boost productivity. It allows them to quickly understand and begin to develop products and services that their customers would want to buy, and then as well as giving them a competitive advantage. But for a lot of other companies, they are first asking the question, before we can drink from the big data fountain, we are just trying to get a handle on, we are just trying to deal with the amount of data, the deluge of data that is coming to us on a daily basis. So let's quickly talk about what this data explosion looks like. This is some numbers that are recently from an IDC report that came out late last year. And it talks about the fact that from 2005 and forecasting forward to 2020, they anticipate that our digital universe is going to grow by a factor of 300%. That is a huge number, and as Tim talked about it before, the IDC numbers translates that from 130 exabytes, which was where we were in about 2005, we are looking at going to something like 40,000 exabytes, or 40 trillion gigabytes. And so that means that for every day, every second, we as individuals and we as corporations are generating a ginormous, that's my analytical big data term, a ginormous amount of data. And while this data is certainly being created at a breakneck speed, we might think that not all of it is relevant. But experts estimate that easily 40% of this data is going to need to be stored, protected, retained for potentially an indefinite period of time. So what I'd like to do is ask our audience today, I'd like to ask a quick polling question to understand the data that's coming into your environment. How are you managing it from the standpoint of data protection? So let me move on to the polling question. And you have 6 choices there. And so what we want to know is, in your current data protection situation, how are you protecting that data? Are you backing up all of your data, or only backing up data but rarely deleting it? Are you backing up only certain data, certain business critical information? Are you backing up certain data, but are you rarely deleting any of that? And then finally, are you regularly deleting your backups, or are you regularly deleting but also performing archiving of that data from the standpoint of lifecycle management? So pick one that best describes what's going on in your environment. So we'll take a moment, we'll pause for a moment, and allow our attendees to weigh in. Tim, will you give me an indicator when we think folks have put in their votes?
Yeah, sure. I think everyone should just make sure you hit the submit button once you've made your selection, and I think enough time has passed. You can probably proceed, Arlene.
Great. So let's see what the results came back with. So about 30% are backing up all their data. So everything that exists within your corporate stream of data, they're backing it up. Some are only backing up certain data, 18%. 36%, close to 37% of you are backing up only certain data, but are rarely putting in compliance or IT governance procedures that say it's time to delete something out of my backup environment. And then going down to the bottom, 18% of you, and I always call this, these are the ones who regularly floss. 18% of you are regularly deleting your backups and performing archiving as a way to do comprehensive data lifecycle management. So that's interesting. So it really spans the gamut, and that's what we see with a lot of EVault customers today. So to that point, I'm going to pass it over to David, because I recognize that gone are the days when all the data that a company retains about their business and about their customers resided in databases. There's new types of data types that are pushing into your corporate environment. And David, talk to us a little bit about what some of those data requirements and data types are.
Absolutely, Arlene. So it's very interesting that 85% of all corporate data is unstructured. And what is unstructured data? Unstructured data comes primarily from users and their devices who are storing a multitude of information all over the place with different file formats, with different file names. And the net result is that most production systems are becoming bloated, and eventually the IT administrator, just doesn't really realize or understand, what is there. And I think the previous poll results know it or show it. Really, what are the least critical stuff that I can finally purge off of my system, Arlene? So, the continued data growth, as Arlene mentioned, has more than doubled between 2010 and 2014, and is projected to triple in most organizations between 2012 and 2015. What this means is that this exponential data growth that's going on within most organizations, and most organizations not understanding or not having the full understanding of what information is critical or what information is not. Most organizations are dealing with that by just continuing to increase the production servers. And ultimately, that leads to a cost spiraling out of control, and ultimately most organizations are faced with, we just can't continue to manage our business this way, and they need to control costs, and so then they seek solutions in market or an alternative strategy for how they'd be managing their business, and to reduce the cost. And as they go down that path, they realize often that not only has the strategy of how they've been expanding their production systems to allow the incremental data growth, often they also realize that they need to also improve to become compliant. And by the way, whether you're in a regulated industry or not, it just makes just good business sense to do some of these basic business practices to ensure ultimately at the end of the day that not only do you have a good backup strategy and a good archiving strategy that are mutually aligned, but when you need to either recover that information or search and get that information back, you have that capability.
So David, that's kind of a good encapsulation of what's going on in a lot of customers' IT environments. And then, kind of going back to our survey just a few slides ago, we saw that customers are really doing, they're using data protection, they're using backup, some are using archiving. But really, let's talk a little bit about what's the difference, what's the distinction between archiving, and isn't that just another form of backup? Isn't that just another form of data protection? What's the difference?
Very good question, Arlene. And backup is for recovery purpose only, and it's normally used in a DR situation to recover at the server level an image. It's a copy of the original. It's to protect the active data in the systems. Typically, the backups, you retain the data for days, weeks, or months. Often when the oldest backups get old, you overwrite or delete the oldest backups. Yes, the backup is immediately recoverable, and yes, it can achieve your RTO and RPO objectives, but it is not the same as archiving. So what is archiving? Archiving is the ability to archive and keep only what matters. The exponential data growth that's going on within the world is because most organizations do not understand what they have, and because they don't understand what they have, they find it difficult to ever delete anything. And so they have bloated production systems, their backups are becoming longer and longer, and so archiving is to keep only what matters. You ought to be able to set up a system that purges off from your production system to the archive system the oldest information or the least critical information to your environment. It's typically the inactive data, the data that has not been accessed for a period of time. You can set the retention in an archive for years, but by the way, there are many industries, particularly in the media industry, where they need to keep archives for decades. Pixar is a good example of that. The intellectual property that goes into an animated movie, that will not get deleted after 10 years. I mean, these organizations have to keep this information for decades, if not centuries. And so you have to have a methodology for archiving off old information, but still be able to recover it when you need to. Typically, an archive in most businesses, though, is that the data can't be deleted or altered, so it's good for compliance and litigation. And the key difference between archiving and backup is that the information is always searchable. So in a summary, what's the difference between a backup and archiving? There are a number of points on the slide, but the two critical ones is that a backup is about immediately recovering that server at the server level when it burns down. A backup or an archive, and it's about the archive is about the original that has been moved off to less expensive secondary storage. But from a compliance perspective, the key difference is that it's immediately searchable. So for example, in our company, 5 years from now, if our legal team needed to find out everything that David Langdon ever did with ABC Company, they ought to be able to find my emails, find my files, find my contracts, find everything from a searchable database that is always online, always available, that you can do it at the granular level. And most backup solutions cannot do that online immediately. You have to recover the database. You have to remount the database. It's an arduous process for any of you that have ever gone through it. So, the archiving is not just to relieve the production storage, to make the backups more efficient, but the archiving also should be put in a format that when you need that information, and every single organization sooner or later will need that back at the item level, whether it's a small HR issue or a large legal issue, you need to have a good system to be able to recover that information very quickly and very efficiently.
So David, that's an excellent point, and I think that moves us right into the next part of archiving, which is the long-term retention side of the coin. So you talked about why businesses need archiving from the standpoint of moving things into out of their production environments, and making sure that they can immediately search on information that's relevant to their business use cases when and where they need it. But also the advantage of archiving is the ability, and you definitely touched upon this, around long-term retention. So your archives, if you, like you said, if you're Disney and you need to make sure that you're retaining, all of the original files for Cinderella and Pinocchio, so that you can repurpose them again and again 2 decades from now, redigitize and re-release them. So from the standpoint of having that information to be able to deliver and potentially repackage, but also there is just simply the historical analysis. A pharmaceutical company may want to look at what their test cases were in the field 5 years before they released a drug, and then perhaps 10 years after the drug has been in production, to look at what have been the responses from patients and doctors in looking at how to improve that product moving forward. Also, I think a lot of customers who are moving their data centers or upgrading their infrastructure are finding the need for long-term retention as a way to keep a copy of their legacy environments. They don't know whether or not they're going to need them, but as opposed to purging them and finding out to their detriment 2 to 3, 5 years later that they cannot retrieve this information, or they no longer have those applications to be supported, archiving and its long-term retention components can be valuable to customers. But at the end of the day, archiving and its long-term retention capabilities move companies to really the final point in their lifecycle management. So setting those policies again to say, and some companies, especially because of regulations and patents, et cetera, will say, all right, we can only keep this data for 20 years. And at 20 years and 1 day, we are going to delete this data. And that's our policy, because the government says you have to keep it for 20 years. So it's like 20 years and 1 day, now we're ready to delete this information. So who's left in 20 years from now when you first initiate this information? Nobody but the systems that you've set these policies for. So yeah, definitely archiving and long-term retention are 2 sides of a very important coin when it comes to data lifecycle management. So David, I'm going to come back to you. So what's the downside for customers, again, going back to that survey, what's the downside for customers who are still simply using backup as a way to manage their aging data in their environments?
Yes, Arlene. So backup is just a costly substitute for archiving, and it's also a very inefficient use of the backup infrastructure. It results in poor data management that overwhelms the production IT environments. Those IT environments are probably paying much more than they need to for larger production environments to support the bloated data than they need. It slows down, all this bloated data slows down the application and server environments. It slows down the backup and the recovery in the DR windows. And it's an expensive way to store seldom used data. But the biggest challenge with just relying on backup, and going back to my previous example, 5 years from now, if someone needed to find something about David and ABC Company, it's like a needle in a haystack, and it's a very arduous process for IT administrators to recover that at the item level when they only rely on a backup solution. So moving data off to the archive, it improves the efficiency of the servers and it improves the efficiencies of the backup. It's easier management, it's a better performance, it allows a faster recovery time in case that you're in a DR situation because you have moved off all of the old or seldom used data to a different environment. It eliminates a redundant data. It lowers the application server costs and lowers production and secondary storage costs. And many organizations may see a cost reduction, in fact, by implementing a hybrid solution. So it's in the end, many organizations will continue to rely on backup without an archiving solution. And it has worked for many organizations, but when you need to find that detail, it's going into that clutter garage, or you can put the data in an organized state that can be easily searched and easily recovered and from an organized database.
Thank you, David. So for companies today, based on some of the pain points that we've articulated here, so you're probably thinking, so when do you know that it's time to start evaluating an archiving solution as an alternative to backup? And when you hit certain bumps in the road, when you're hitting certain performance obstacles and challenges, and some of those really span the gamut from the standpoint of ongoing data protection, that would be the first indicator. If your IT team is feeling that they've got too many balls that they're trying to juggle, at EVault we see a lot of our customers have anywhere from 2 to 3 years of aging data that's dispersed across their data centers, regional offices, small offices, as well as sitting on laptops and mobile devices. And this creates a real challenge for an IT team because they have to not only service and support all of those environments, they need to be sure that they are protecting the critical data over a long period of time. And then meanwhile, data is continuing to grow. And again, in the case of a lot of EVault customers that we've talked to, they're seeing their business data in some cases double as quickly as every 2 years. And as we all know, with our own laptops, when you've got too much data sitting on your laptop, performance begins to slow down. And this becomes painfully evident when you're talking about applications like Exchange that slow down because there's too much data there, or there's a long lag time for users trying to access files, critical files in their day-to-day business operation. And just like the garage scenario that we just walked through, keeping aged data in production environments and in your production storage environments is very inefficient. And finally, compliance and litigation. If that's a critical requirement for your business, then you recognize that you have the potential to be facing stiff financial penalties that can be levied by regulatory agencies if you fail to adequately put in place plans and procedures to secure, protect, and store that data in the event of some sort of outage or disaster. And if companies are in situations where they need to recover relevant data in a timely fashion, such as with litigation, then things like legal eDiscovery become a criticality to perhaps even to your revenue stream if you are spending inordinate amount of time and dollars trying to find relevant data in a quick fashion. So David, what does archiving look like from the standpoint of providing a more healthy environment for data lifecycle management?
Yes, Arlene. So it three prime benefits: accelerated data availability, both by improved backup and recovery operations because you've moved OData off of your production systems. That will result in improved application performance and probably allow an increased probability of delivering promised SLAs for your users. You can also mitigate the data growth. So data has already tripled in the last couple of years, and it's the path is continuing to do that. So you can not only stop the ongoing data growth within your organization by reducing your production footprint, but you can extend your server and storage hardware CapEx investment because you will get longer life out of it because you will have a methodology now for archiving old content off of your production systems. But even if you chose not to take all of those benefits, from a strict compliance and discovery perspective, you have simplified your overhead to meet compliance and discovery when it happens. So whether that's that HR issue or that large legal issue, by having the data in a format or a structured format that is indexed, that is very easily searched and recovered and kept, you are lowering your overhead to search through that weed of data in an unstructured environment. So Arlene, did you want to explain the recommendation?
Sorry, I was on mute. I apologize. So this is a quote which I think really encapsulates the points that you were making from Gartner from a report back in March of last year. And net, what they're saying is if you're using backup instead of archiving as a way to address your needs for long-term retention, then you're really just contributing to the data growth explosion problem that you're working to solve. So looking for more efficient means of managing that data is really all about what a good archiving solution should look like. So David, I'm going to ask you to talk about some of the features, some of the capabilities that customers should be looking at when they're evaluating archiving solutions.
Yes, Arlene. So many organizations, when they go down this path, they start with email archiving. But the larger problem within most organizations is the file folder, the content archiving. So whether or not you choose or an organization chooses to implement a full solution set, at least from a vendor selection perspective, you should have a sight for the end goal. So even if you choose not to implement file and folder and SharePoint archiving and all of the additional archiving capabilities of a production environment beyond email, by having at least in the core platform choice the ability to do that when you are ready, then it will bring further efficiencies later. So one of those efficiencies, for example, is my legal team, they need to find out David, an ABC company, they don't want to be going to different systems to find the contracts and the file folders and the marketing documents that were from the content system and another system to get the email. They want in the end a consolidated search screen that can recover all of that information back within seconds, whether or not you choose to implement the full solution suite or not. In terms of some of the things that you should look for specifically on email archiving, many organizations will implement email archiving either for compliance, regulatory compliance, and again, whether or not you're in a compliant state, it's good business practice to do it. Or some organizations go down the path of implementing archiving because they've got a bloated Exchange server and they want to get, the order stuff off of the Exchange server. But whether or not you solve the other business problem, at least from a technology perspective, make sure that you pick a platform that can solve both business problems, whether or not you choose to implement it, so that when you need to solve the other business problem in the future, that you can just simply click on that feature within the platform without having to realize that you're at a dead end. The solution ought to be able to be accessed but not deleted for compliance. Make sure that you pick a solution that meets compliant regulations such as the HIPAA and others. And even if you are in a business that don't need to have those certifications, it at least makes sure that from a technology or a platform perspective, that the technology and the platform is capable of keeping the data in a secure manner, protects the privacy of your company, and is completely auditable in case you ever need to.
Arlene, you may be on mute again.
No.
No,
We just got a slide. Okay, so it's just the slide catching up. So in case of a file folder and SharePoint archiving, make sure you pick the solution that can solve both business problems, that you can have policy-based approach both at the server, user, or file and folder level, that allows you to be granular with different users within your organization. The benefits of less data on the primary server will improve the performance. Ensure that the solution does full text and indexing as it's archiving for faster recovery later, and that the data can be accessed but not deleted.
Thanks, David. So one other component that we've touched on several times before, but it comes down to intuitive search and automated search capabilities, and this is never more evident than when it comes to lawsuits, because we always know that when it comes to lawyers, time is money. And one of the obvious targets for cost reduction for legal departments today is the cost of either an in-house team or outside attorneys or auditors who have to review your data, whether you're preparing for litigation, so you can analyze privileged information, or you are responding to opposing counsel. A Rand Institute study showed that in 2012 showed that approximately 73 cents of every legal dollar spent is spent on eDiscovery. So it's not the time that's spent in the courtroom, it's the time wading through tremendous amounts of data that are in emails, in files, on mobile devices. All of this information is considered content that can be called into to be produced for cases. And being able to have a tool that can quickly look across all of that data allows a company to quickly make an informed decision. Do we go forward with this lawsuit, or do we in fact decide to settle, cut our losses, reach a negotiation, an equitable agreement, and not go to court? That is an important, the cost and finding the relevant data, or the smoking gun, if you will, really helps companies to decide whether or not they're going to make the investment in a legal pursuit. And lastly, we talked about the auditable compliance. That's also hugely important in litigation from the standpoint of legal hold. And that ensures and allows companies to prove that all the relevant data that may be asked for or has been asked for is going to be retained in an unalterable state, and that it has not been deleted. Whether that case gets settled in 6 months or whether that case gets settled in 6 years. So David, we're kind of coming up to the end. Let's talk about some of the benefits of why archiving in the cloud makes good sense for companies today.
Absolutely, Arlene. So begin with, we're not prejudiced here because our company supports both in-house and cloud-based solutions equally to the choice of the customer. But in the majority of cases now, cloud-based solutions just make better economic sense for a couple of reasons. The most important reason is in-house solutions. You've got that huge upfront capex cost to spin up the environment to begin with. whether you're using the capacity or not. You've got more IT support and admin to manage it, and you've got that continual additional injection of CapEx to invest in the additional storage footprint as it grows. Cloud-based solutions for most companies, there's no normally any upfront CapEx expense. There's very minimum upfront costs with lowly monthly fees. You basically pay for what you use, so you're not over-provisioned or under-provisioned in your data center. You have the ability that most cloud-based solutions, the DR is already embedded in the cloud-based solution. So a good cloud-based solution has the geographically redundant protection in another data center. That is part of the cloud-based. So if the main cloud-based data center was to burn down, the system automatically fails over, and that just becomes part of your fee, and you don't have to worry about it. And most organizations can't build those type of secondary DR sites cost efficiently as what can be done on scale in the cloud. Hands-free administration, normally less people to manage it because the environment is already there, so it's more the application management that the organization or policy management that the organization needs to focus in on. And the cloud storage will scale as quickly as your solutions grow because a properly architected cloud solution incorporates that across tens of thousands of customers that is difficult to plan, properly manage in-house.
So David, I'm going to touch on one of the points that you talked about of the advantages of cloud-based archiving and data protection. I'm sure everyone remembers the devastation a year and a half ago of Hurricane Sandy, and we're getting back in the hurricane season again. But many companies they had to shut down operations for their offices, for their data centers for several weeks. And several EVault customers who were on the Eastern Seaboard in New York and Jersey and Massachusetts recognized that their data centers and their remote offices were at risk. And so what they basically did is they called us up when when the National Weather Service said, this is going to be a big one, and they said, we'd like to be able to replicate these our data and our applications to sites outside of what we expect to be the fallout. And so they were able to replicate to our locations in other parts of the U.S. And this really, from the standpoint of archiving, gives companies kind of an assurance policy against what are worst case scenarios, because not only is it your archived, your long-term aged data that sits in a cloud, but also your current email environments, your current files that are relevant to your business. So if your archiving procedures moves that data on a fairly regular basis, you're able to retrieve that data in a cloud environment when that cloud environment is located outside of what might be the expected range of devastation from some type of a natural disaster, whether that's earthquakes or tornadoes or, California just went through some pretty significant fires, forest fires that devastated regions, and lots of cities were out of power for several hours and for several days. So that's another advantage that I just wanted to highlight. So David, I think we are coming down to our summary. So what I got from this, and what I think is a takeaway for most of the audience, hopefully, is that you need to be looking at comprehensive strategy for archiving your important data. And that is data that you know is critical today, but that you have a good indication that is going to be important for you to retain tomorrow, because the data is going to continue to grow and its relevance is going to continue to be important, both from the standpoint of helping you to get more out of that data, as well as to respond to critical requirements such as compliance or for litigation. So at this point, David, I'm going to ask if you could quickly talk about the EVault Cloud Connected Advantage.
Absolutely, Arlene. So we've been in business since 1997. We've got 15 years delivering infrastructure as a service. We operate ISO certified SSAE 16 compliant data centers. Because we're part of the Seagate organization, and because most of our customers are banks and credit unions, our data centers achieve and overachieve the highest security video surveillance that those customers need. And we've got a hybrid of data centers around the world. All of our cloud solutions include geographic data replication as part of the service to the customer, so the customer does not need to worry about it. And we are part of the Seagate organization, which is the world leader in storage solutions. So not only have we been in business and we began this industry, but we're very well funded, and so we're a solution and company that can be relied on to be there in the long term when you need it.
And it's not to say that the data and IT systems always hum along perfectly. We know that that's not the case, and we see that with our customers every day. On average, EVault helps customers perform well over 15,000 recoveries every month. We help them go through annual best practice implementations, whether it's audits, whether it's disaster recovery. And we're very proud of the fact that we have consistently, year after year, achieve a 98% or higher customer satisfaction rating from our customers for the service that we deliver for them. And at the end of the day, what we provide for our customers is a combination of the very best cloud-connected technology, Tier 1 cloud data centers that are staffed by a team of experts, a team of recovery and storage experts that understand your business and are there for you. And then our mantra, our focus is always that you have fail-proof recovery on time, every time, when and where you need it. So at this point, I would like to say thank you very much to everyone, and especially David for joining me on this presentation. And I think at this point, Tim, we're going to open it up for the audience to ask questions of us.
Yep. Thank you, Arlene and David. Very good presentations. You guys covered an awful lot of ground and incredibly detailed and useful. So thank you both for doing such a wonderful job. We do have some questions that came in, so I want to thank our audience again for being very interactive and providing some good questions. So the first question is, what is the downside of archiving in the cloud? Can you provide any sort of anecdotal examples of what people might have experienced, or are there any real downsides to be concerned with?
Yes, so the archiving in the cloud will meet the business requirements of the majority. There could be some customers that might have very large amounts of data, petabytes and petabytes of data, that may be, just due to the volume of size, it may not be practical to put in the cloud. But having said that, there are more efficient storage platforms, better technology to manage that in the cloud. And so we're seeing more and more customers with very large amounts of data move to the cloud. Arlene, did you want to add to my statement, or are you okay with that?
I think the only thing that I would add to that is, certainly customers that are extremely risk averse but want to, and risk averse can be, I want to eliminate any possible risks within my own network or IT infrastructure, and I want to eliminate any risks associated with the cloud, but I want to take advantage of the cloud. Then what we see companies typically do is they set aside some portion of their in-house storage infrastructure, and that is where they do their archiving, and then on a regularly scheduled basis they take that archived data and they replicate it to the cloud. So they're not impacting their production environment, they're not impacting their backup windows, but they also have that added assurance and confidence should the worst case scenario happen in their data center or in some remote office. They have that copy. They are retaining their long-term archival data in the cloud in a way that's highly available and very cost effective.
Oh, very good. Thanks for very detailed answers, both of you. By the way, I wanted to mention that I didn't mention earlier that both Arlene and David's information is on the screen, obviously in front of you, with their email addresses. So should you have a desire to contact them with additional questions following the webinar today, you are free to do so. So with that, the second question I have here is you mentioned about archiving solutions for unstructured data, David. I believe that was part of your presentation. Are there any solutions, storage options in the market for archiving structured data like mainframe data files, data in RDBMS, etc.?
There are, but what we'll do is we'll follow up with that individual and to the broader audience with a list of solutions because I don't have them at hand right here.
Okay, yep, no problem at all. Next question is, you had the word stubbing on the email slide. Can you provide some additional details on what that is exactly?
Yeah, great question. So the term stubbing, in just normal layman's sense, is better referenced as just an index file. So when you move data off of the production server, whether it's an email server or whether it's a content server, sometimes a strategy is to replace the content with a stub index file, so that when the user natively browses the content server or natively browses their email, you see that reference file that at that point is retrieving the content from the archive platform, but the weighty old content has been removed from the production system, freeing up production space, making your backups more efficient, but that's what stubbing is referencing.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. So another question is, so if an employee deletes an email and 2 years later needs that to be retrieved, can they still get it back?
Absolutely. So a good archive solution will integrate into the mail platform and capture all of the transactions going through the mail platform. So even if I was to send an email and 2 seconds later delete it, or receive an email and 2 seconds later delete it, that even that deleted email is captured, because in the future, if you either have that HR issue or that large legal issue, often it's the deleted content that is as critical to mounting a proper legal defense as it is the state of the Exchange server at that point in time. And that's probably the other biggest difference between archiving and just a DR, is the ability to natively ensure that you've captured the deleted content as it's happening in real time.
And I had a situation, and this really kind of came in relevance to me from a use case where I was working at a different company. I wasn't at EVault, and you use your email, you use Exchange and Outlook really as your own kind of quick reference file folder. Because everything is based on time-sensitive data. And I remember that I, went to look for something that was like 6 months old. I knew exactly when it had happened. And when I, went through my inbox, I couldn't get past like 5 months. And when I called the IT department, they were like, "Yeah, we deleted all that data." And I was like, but I need that data back. And they're like, oh, well, sorry, we don't have that. We haven't archived it. And so I ended up having to call some other people, and can you email me this, and can you send me back a copy of that? So it was a little frustrating. And stubbing is a really efficient way for your users from a productivity standpoint to know that their data is there, whether it's 6 months old, or it's 2 years old, or it's 5 years old, however long you're still with that corporation, that you can still search and retrieve that information without, in my case, having to pick up the phone and call IT and say, hey, I need to find that email back. I suppose probably if I was the president of the company or the CFO, they probably could have found it, but they weren't going to do it for me, someone in marketing. So that was a painful example. So when I came to EVault and started learning more about archiving from the standpoint of email optimization, I was really, really very satisfied about that.
That sounds like a great feature. So, okay, the next question is, if we use Exchange Outlook archiving, do we still need third-party archiving solutions?
Yeah, so the third-party archiving solutions, yes, from several angles. One is that so that as that legal officer or HR officer, you can search the whole pool to ensure that you've got the deleted content, not just the steady state of the Exchange server, to ensure that you've got the additional tools that can do the legal hold and case management. Are the top reasons why. In the end, a good solution is not about the archiving itself, or it's not about the backup itself. It's about the ability to recover when you need to, quickly, efficiently, within seconds, and that's the differentiating fact.
Okay, very good. So I'm going to leave one more question on the table, and then we'll go into a couple wrap-up items here. But what is a reasonable time for retaining data?
Yeah, so it depends on the industry. So for most businesses might say 10 years is enough. But there are certain industry groups, particularly in media and entertainment, that may need it for decades. So. But in our experience, most organizations keep it for about 10 years in a searchable state. So that I can go back over the past 10 years and find from my archive what I need in a searchable state.
Oh, very good. Okay, well, David and Arlene, thank you very much for some very thoughtful and detailed answers to some good questions. For those of you that did ask questions that weren't answered today, as we're just about out of time, rest assured those questions are going to be sent to Arlene and David, and they can follow up with you directly. I have just a few quick announcements to make to please mark your calendars for our next Data Science Central webinar on October 29th. The webinar is entitled Making Flow Happen, Dashboards that Persuade, Inform, and Engage, sponsored by Tableau. Also, as I mentioned earlier, today's taping will be made available on demand later on this afternoon and can be found on the homepage of Data Science Central in the video section on the homepage. This brings today's webinar to a close. I would like to thank our audience again for their attendance, participation in the polls, and some very good questions. And a special thank you to EVault for sponsoring today's event, and to our panelists, Arlene Urquhart and David Langdon, for their insight and perspective on today's topic. My name is Tim Madison. I'm very pleased to have been your host today, and I look forward to seeing you all again on October 29th. Good day.
Thanks, Tim.